Welcome everybody to tonight's Teisho, which is going to be taken from the Hikikan Roku, case 30, Joshu's A Big Radish. A monk asked Joshu, "I have heard that you closely followed Nansen. Is that true?" Joshu said, "Chinchu produces a big radish." Secho's verse. Chinchu produces a big radish. Monks have taken it as their model. They know only how it was and would be. How can they truly realize the swan is white, the crow is black? Plunderer, plunderer. The monk had his nostrils threaded through. Yesterday I gave a talk at a arts festival. I didn't know it was an arts festival until I actually got there. I thought it was kind of an interfaith group, so I had prepared something that was geared towards fellow clergy and serious practitioners. And I found myself with having about a quarter of the time that I thought I was going to have. So I was trying to condense everything within a very short period of time. And every once in a while when I give a Dharma talk, and it's definitely far from conscious, I turn into a Baptist preacher. I have no idea where it comes from, but it just kind of takes over. And normally my Dharma talks are kind of, easygoing, but every once in a while they really have fire behind them. And one of my students had told me, you sound like a Baptist preacher. And it's true. Sometimes when you give a teisho, you really speak from the heart. And there is kind of this autonomous persona that arises, the master, we talked about Hyakujo, and the current abbot, that just kind of rises up very organically and comes out with no thought needed over it. And that's really how it was yesterday. It's funny because some of it I don't even remember saying. I remember the gist of it, but it just came out. With no effort whatsoever, with no memory whatsoever. And some of it had to do with what I had prepared, but most of it did not. And those are really some of the best Dharma talks. And it's nice to understand context, and context really helps us to move through the koan. So the commentary and the poems and the verses and everything are very important to read and understand as well. But really what is needed within a koan is to really feel it, to let that inner Buddha nature, that inner current abbot, come to the forefront. But I have to get a chuckle out of it that I sound sometimes like a Baptist preacher. And I don't say that in any negative regards whatsoever, because they're extremely passionate about their sermons and such forth. But normally you don't hear a Buddhist monk comparable to a Baptist preacher, but apparently that is definitely a persona in me and comes out only certain times, but when it does, it always speaks the truth, which is very interesting, always speaks the truth. And again, not even a conscious stream of thought when speaking, but just speaking. So, looking at today's koan, which is quite in a way humorous when we think about it. So a little background about this. So Nansen lived 748 to around 835. Joshu, of course, was his student. And we know Joshu and Nansen from Nansen Cuts the Cat in Two and such forth. Also a student was Hyakujo, Akai, Rinzai, and they were all heirs of Mazu. So a lot of really heavy hitters here. So Nansen was a very competent and a very sharp a Zen teacher, as well as his heirs were. It also is important to know that, so this is Hyakujo Akai, and Hyakujo, the first time that I ever did a session, and it was only myself and my teacher, because the center was had moved from their old location to a new location, and I was really the only student that was there. And it was the first time that I'd ever done session. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what to expect. So I kind of was tripping clumsily, through the session, and my teacher was very patient with me at the time. But at some point in time, I had to lay down. And this was right after one of my first back surgeries. So I still was kind of weak. I remember showing up the first time to the temple there, actually still using canes. So now I'm doing session and really have no idea what session is. I just know it's going to be very painful for me. And I had to go upstairs at some point in time, and just excuse me, and I had to lay flat. And it's probably maybe for an hour or so. And then I had heard, the lunch bell ring, and I had gone downstairs. I was sleeping in kind of like this closet, was my bedroom, with all these old robes hanging above me, which was kind of neat, so I could kind of see a little history of the temple hanging above me, some old rakusus and such forth. So I come downstairs when I hear the lunch bell, because I'm hungry, because I been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, and pain really kind of takes it out of you. And I went and sat down, and the teacher was just kind of looking at the table. And I was like, okay. And I had no idea, jihatsu or how to eat or anything like that. And I had said, I'm sorry. I said, please excuse me. I said, I just really needed to lay down and rest my back. And he had said, well, a day without work is a day without eating. And that was the first time that I had ever heard that statement made, and that was made by Hyakujo. And Hyakujo was very, very focused on being self-sufficient. So instead of primarily begging people for alms and money and such forth, he believed that monks and temples should be self-sufficient. So a day without work was a day without eating, and this just happens to be about food in a roundabout way, if you will. When I was a boy, I used to come every summer to Pennsylvania, and my family is from here. My grandfather had run a moderate-sized farm for many years. It wasn't his primary occupation, but I think back then in that area it was very common, to kind of do a little of both, to farm and to have outside employment. And there were always such memorable times, because I was there kind of in late winter, early spring until fall. And I can remember going through kind of the whole farming process. And it was always so magical for me. And I always remember, walking behind the tractor, and my job was to pick the big stones that the till had kind of brought up to the surface, to pick those up and put them in a pile away, to kind of prepare the soil. And preparing the soil is very important. Even before really anything is done, making sure that the location that you have is conducive to growing whatever crop that you're going to be growing. Just picking some old stony patch, doesn't do. It has to be an area that has the correct nutrient for the harvest that you're going to be, planting. So even before anything's done, he would figure out which field he was going to plant, and depending on, you know, when last it was planted and what was planted there. Because you also have to give the area time to kind of regrow and reabsorb a lot of nutrients. So picking out fertile ground is important. And, you know, it's important in spirituality too. If we look at the story of like Daibusatsu Zendo, and we look at the story of Choboji, and if we look at the story of Blue Mountain Zendo, and so many countless other temples in the United States and around other countries, there's always a story, a background story about the mountain or about the grounds from which the temple sits on. And really picking out fertile ground for spirituality is probably one of the most important steps, because we can pick out ground that is not fertile, that really doesn't grow too much, that is very kind of rocky. Or we can pick out soil that is very fertile and grows wonderful harvests year after year after year. And one of the other things that I like so much about it is I was raised in the country somewhat, and also in the suburbs, so a little bit of both. But I always remember getting my hands dirty picking those stones up. And in the area, the Blue Mountain area, the soil has a lot of clay in it, so it's red. So when you would get your hands muddy, your hands would actually turn red. And I remember I loved that feeling of actually getting my hands in there and actually doing the work, as Hyakujo would say, you know, a day without work is a day without eating. There was something that was immediate about it. And there was something magical about it that, you know, at some point in time, instead of just being a muck of clay, tilled clay, that, you know, this was going to be beautiful rows of corn or soy or whatever was being planted. And depending on the temple or depending on the tradition, they pick up the flavor, if you will, or they pick up the aspects of the soil that they are planted upon. For instance, like Daibusatsu, for me, it's changed a great deal since I was there. But back when I was there, Daibusatsu always had kind of a very strict flavor, a very powerful flavor though. And the feeling was, sometimes overwhelming. And Edo Roshi's teachings were very powerful. Yet there was also some kind of hints of instability in places too. So Daibusatsu had its own energy, and the soil now that is being tilled there, from what I hear, is very different than that. Minus, of course, it's still very powerful and still strict. But even if we go now to like Choboji, which is the temple that we're associated with now, and where my teacher Genjo Roshi is abbot, it's more of a little bit more laid back. It's still extremely powerful, but there's more of an essence of love and compassion, equanimity, equality. And it's kind of a different feel. So both very much fertile soil that has been taken care of for many, many years to get to the point where they are now. But, you know, a different feel because different things were planted in the soil, different fertilizers. It was tilled in different ways. And just naturally, it had a different energy. In Japan, they believe that, you know, everything has kami or spirit. So a mountain or a rock or an ocean or whatever has a specific spirit that you can actually feel. Reverend Baresh, who is a Shinto priest, had come from Washington State to visit us several years ago and had done a purification ceremony for the mountain kami that resided on the mountain that we were kind of nestled up against. And even before he had come and kind of explained, Shinto's different from Buddhism, so a lot of us just had a basic understanding of it, but we knew that there was always a feel to it, to the ground, to the soil, to the trees, to the mountain itself. We could feel it. And there was always one place in particular we'd always go because it felt like such fertile soil. It was so powerful just naturally. And that was actually the area that we did the ceremony at. Again, it was very interesting to actually feel something that normally we would consider, inanimate, or a rock. Well, how can a rock have a spirit? How can a mountain have a spirit? How can a tree have a spirit? But they all do in a way that we can feel them, and they all feel a little bit different. The Native Americans used to call trees standing people, and they believed that they could communicate and talk with them. They saw that, the trees had kami, had spirits, and the land had spirit. The land was spirit itself, which is very similar to a lot of Zen perspectives when it comes to the world around us, both the relative and the absolute. And then there's, of course, Blue Mountain Zendo, which is very eclectic, from origins in Vietnamese Zen to Soto Zen to Rinzai Zen, probably about a total of 5 different temples and groups that have kind of coalesced into this amalgamation that's now Blue Mountain Zendo, this soil. And we've kind of picked up a little bit of each temple that we've gone through. And I think there have been, before I was teaching or recognizing teacher, we had some vice abbots of Daibusatsu, and we had other teachers, the Soto teacher that would come, and they all offered something different. They all gave it a little bit different flavor. And Blue Mountain Zendo kind of turned into a creation of kind of this eclectic background with various teachers, and Soto and Rinzai, and Vietnamese Tien or Vietnamese Zen, and even some Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism in there as well, when I chanted with the SGI group in Allentown, I think, for like a year. So Blue Mountain Zendo has its own flavor too, or its own type of fertile soil as well. And I'm sure that the temple that you go to, or maybe even your home around you or where you sit, has its own energy, its own kami, its own fertile soil. In this koan, also, when we talk about fertile soil, it's not just the original nature of our spiritual soil, or our farming soil, but it's years and years of practice of preparing it. And it's different for everybody to bring that fertile soil to kind of a crescendo in which it begins to manifest a great harvest. We do things like Zazen. We're always doing Zazen, and we do, reading in the beginning to prepare our fertile soil, and then we have Dokusan after Dokusan after Dokusan, hearing no, 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 and then every once in a while we hear a yes, and you can always tell when somebody hears a yes at Dokusan as they're walking back to their seat. They kind of have, this spring in their step and almost this little smile on their face. They're so happy. And we have Samu practice, which is physical practice, and all these things are kind of preparing this fertile soil. Maybe we found, Zen Buddhism, and that's our fertile soil. Or maybe we found, Christianity or Islam or the Baha'i faith or Sufi or whatever. Wherever we find our fertile ground, but just finding it is not enough, right? It just means that, we found a place where it would be nice to put a lifelong home, right? So we found kind of our plot, if you will. And some of the other things too that we prepare our soil with are trials and tribulations. The suffering and sometimes pain that comes along with session, and the emotional pain that we experience as we practice. And those dark, dark nights, all of those things are preparing the soil. It's not just, visionary flowers and Buddhas and love and compassion, but it's also a lot of painful things that we manifest in order to prepare the soil. After we're done preparing the soil, right, so we just begin to kind of bear into our practice, whatever that is, and we found what we consider our home. And that's such an interesting thing, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard people, after doing their first session or their first couple Zazenkais, come to me and say, I feel like I found home, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people don't get past that. And that's only just the beginning of the practice, is finding that fertile soil, finding our home. We have to begin to plow it then. We have to mix it up. We have to churn all of these, nurturing aspects, all of these experiences, all of this fertilizer. They talk about the lotus growing from the muck at the bottom of the pond. All of these things, we need to mix it together. We need to mix it together also with emptiness, almost like when we aerate the soil. I said, as a boy, I always used to, walk after the tractor and pick the stones out. One of the things about tilling is aerating the soil, so the soil has air within it. And this is just like, mixing emptiness up with form and form with emptiness, and all of these things till they're not separate, but they're just complete. And they are unified together, in this wonderful, fertile, and now fertilized, and now tilled field of spirituality. One of the next steps is planting seeds. And this is really tricky. Most of you have heard of a storehouse consciousness. That's where we kind of keep a lot of aspects of ourselves as well as experiences that we have. Everything from our genetic predisposition, say we have a predisposition for alcoholism, that would be a storehouse seed, or say we have a tendency to become angry, that's a storehouse seed. And all of these things are kind of planted in our subconscious. But we also have seeds of love, we have seeds of compassion and equanimity and strength and giving and humility. We have all these positive seeds too. So when it comes to planting the seed, it's very important that we're careful. That we plant the right kind of seed. And that we don't plant seeds that are going to turn into weeds and choke out the very positive seeds that we planted. It's also important too not to plant too many seeds together, because they will choke each other out and there won't be enough nutrient. So being very mindful of your actions on this fertile soil, as you're sitting in Zazen, as you're walking through the halls of the monastery, is very important. So it's not just the quality of the seed, but it's also, how much karma are you creating? How much are you trying? Are you over trying? Are you over planting? Or are you just within the moment and planting the seeds as they arise? So it's very, very important that we watch that we don't plant the seeds of suffering. One of the next steps is inevitably, even if we plant seeds of love and compassion and equanimity and humility, unknowingly we're going to be planting some of those noxious seeds. And not that they're bad or good, but they do have consequences, as what we talked about with Hyakujo and the fox. So we have to, it's not once and done thing, well, we found the soil, we've, fertilized the soil with all these great nutrients, and now we've planted the seeds and now it's over. It's also time to go through and to weed out those noxious seeds that have grown, that we didn't catch, that kind of snuck out. So we're always kind of going up and down, the rows, or maybe we have a flower bed, and every other day we have to go through and kind of pick out those weeds, that are choking out the flowers, to make sure that all of those wholesome seeds, have the energy and the nutrients that they need to grow. So it's a continuation, always a continuation of this process. Of making sure that we remain mindful and diligent in practice, in caring for our fertile ground and the seeds that we have planted. So weeding those seeds is extremely important, and keeping up with it is extremely important. And it's not just that we're doing these things for ourselves. It's not that we're going through all of these steps so that we can just enjoy the harvest. We're doing this so that the whole community, all sentient beings, can enjoy the harvest together. And if our practice is really strong and mindful, then we've found fertile soil, we've enriched it, we tilled it, we weeded it, and now our bounty is, as the old saying goes, we reap what we sow. So we really begin to see the fruits or the harvest of our hard work. And exactly how mindful were we through that process? I always talk to my wife about how hard it is to find fruits and vegetables that actually taste like fruits and vegetables at the grocery store. I live in a farming state, but yet I can't find any local produce, and the produce that's there many times has been in cold storage for 6 months to a year. And it looks like it's fresh and it's nice and red like an apple or something like that, but yet it's actually, in the same sense, a little wrinkly and strange feeling. And that's because it's been in cold storage. And I had a friend that had an orchard here in Pennsylvania.